Shabbat Shalom, dear congregation. Today we are reading Parashat Va'etchanan, which means I pleaded. And my method of learning Torah is such that I always try to connect personally with the people in the book, and I try to imagine what would I do in their place, how would I react to their challenges, and if I would make a different decision compared to what they did. And this portion particularly resonates with me in a very special way because I deeply feel for Moshe, who is pleading with God. The book of Dvarim, as we spoke before, is very different in style from other books because it's a story given from Moshe's personal perspective. He says, I pleaded with God, and he describes his feelings and experience. So let us read quickly the part of the chapter 3, the beginning of the Parashat together. I pleaded with God at that time, saying, O Lord, you who let your servant see the first works of your greatness and your mighty hand, you whose powerful deeds no God in heaven or earth can equal, let me, I pray, cross over and see the good land on the other side of the Jordan, that good hill country and the Lebanon. But God was wrathful with me on your account and would not listen to me. God said to me, enough, never speak to me of this matter again. Go up to the summit of Pisgah and gaze about to the west, to the north, to the south and the east. Look at it well, for you shall not go across Jordan. Give Joshua his instructions and imbue him with strength and courage, for he shall go across at the head of this people, and he shall allot to them the land that you may only see. So my question is, how do you feel about this conversation? Do you sympathize with Moshe? Do you agree with God's decision? Do you think that God did not let Moshe come to the land he was dreaming about for a rightful reason? I give you a second to think. No, just think. I personally feel very sorry for Moshe. Can you imagine? Moshe dedicated his whole life to this reckless project of bringing Israelites from slavery to freedom, from the house of bondage to their homeland. And in the end, he did not get to see the results of his work. And the response of God is quite harsh. He says, enough, never speak to me of this matter again. And some commentators explain this reaction as a fulfillment of God's decree. For example, Abarbanel, who is a famous Portuguese scholar of 15th century, says it indicates that God sworn to fulfill his promise of not letting Moshe let Israelites into the promised land. So there was an oath given by God, and he could not change it. Some say that when God allowed Moshe to see the land from the top of the mountain, he showed him mercy. Right? He couldn't overcome his own oath not to let him go into the country, yet he let him see the good land, because Moshe asked, let me see the good land. So he says, okay, see it. I happen to slightly disagree with this idea of mercy. For me, it sounds more like, you want to see the land? Okay, go, go and see, but never speak to me about it again. And moreover, what is the reason that Moshe was denied to see the culmination, really, of his efforts, of his life's journey? We spoke last week about that the book of Dvarim is retelling the story differently from what we learned before in the previous books. And one of the most prominent examples in our chapter is that we have this, we spoke about it last week, the account of spies, and that it was different in two books. So in this story, we have the same kind of a situation. We have two stories that have different accounts. So let us also quickly look at the story that was told in Numbers chapter 20. The community was without water, and they joined against Moshe and Aaron. The people quarreled with Moshe, saying, "Why did you make us leave Egypt to bring us to this wretched place, a place with no grain or figs or vines or pomegranates? There is not even water to drink." And Moshe and Aaron came away from the congregation to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces. The presence of God appeared to them, and God spoke to Moshe, saying, "You and your brother Aaron take the rod and assemble the community, and before their very eyes order the rock to yield its water." Do you remember the story? Does it ring a bell? Okay, good. Thus you shall produce water for them from the rock and provide drink for the congregation and their beasts. Moshe took the rod from before God, and as he had been commanded, and Moshe and Aaron assembled the congregation in front of the rock, and he said to them, "Listen, you rebels, shall we get water for you out of this rock?" And Moshe raised his hand and struck the rock twice with his rod, and out came a lot of water, and the community and their beasts drank. But God said to Moshe and Aaron, "Because you did not trust me enough to affirm my sanctity in the sight of the Israelite people, therefore you shall not lead this congregation into the land that I have given him." This is a very perplexing story. It is clear that God was angry with Moshe and Aaron, but why exactly? Some commentators say that it's because Moshe struck the rock instead of just asking water to appear. But God did not actually give any instructions on exactly how the water should appear. So others say that it's because Moshe struck the rock twice, as if for a moment he hesitated. He struck it once, the water didn't appear, so he didn't believe maybe for a second that it would appear, so he kind of showed the mistrust to God, so he struck it the second time. And another version is that it was about how Moshe said, because he said, "Shall we get water for you out of this rock?" instead of saying, "Let God bring the water out of the rock." But then it's not clear what Aaron's fault was in all this story, because he didn't strike the rock or, call water to appear, so why was he also punished? So in this case, God in the Torah doesn't give a clear reasoning for his anger. And surprisingly, he's angry with Moshe and Aaron, but he's not angry with people who quarreled with Moshe. And as I said, in this Torah's portion of today, we have the different kind of account of this situation. The Moshe gives a different explanation of God did not let him enter the land. Moshe says, in our chapter today, God was wrathful with me on your account. In this story, people are responsible, not him striking the rock or saying something wrong, but the people did something wrong. And this is referring to the story of the spies that we spoke of last week. People were afraid to enter the land of Israel and were punished for that. God said that nobody from that generation would enter the land. And in this book of Dvarim, Moshe is clearly blaming the people and doesn't even mention the incident with the rock. In the book of Dvarim, there is no such story as rock and water. It's just he's saying, on your account, you did something and I got punished for you. Because of you, God was incensed with me too, saying you shall not enter it either, enter the land. So what can we learn from this discrepancy with these two versions? I think that these narratives are meant to provoke emotional response and encourage us to wrestle with the text. I wrestled with the text and I was pretty angry with God on behalf of Moshe, feeling that this punishment was disproportionate. We all want to have good life and get rewards for our efforts, but by the end of my life, I would love to see some good results of my efforts and my work. And I think that it's natural for people to want that, but Moshe did not get to see it after all his dedication and righteousness and leadership. So I couldn't stop asking, like, why? Moshe argued with God multiple times in the Torah. He saved the Israelites. He was telling God, don't destroy them. He was able to convince God to change God's ruling several times in the Torah. So why is he not able to do it now? And how can someone be punished for the deeds of others? For me, it just didn't end up, and I couldn't resolve it until I noticed that on other occasions Moshe pleaded with God on behalf of other people. And this is the first time when he's asking something for himself. So perhaps this kinds of pleas only effective when we care for other people, when we want other people to be safe and healthy and happy, but it maybe doesn't quite work that well when we ask for ourselves. Perhaps it lacks some kind of selfless approach that makes our prayer stronger. In the tradition of Jewish communities, it is in a way preferable to pray for other people. For example, we say a prayer for healing, which we said just right now, mentioning others people's names, but rarely we do it for ourselves. And then it really struck me that throughout the Torah we see many instances of individuals interceding with God on behalf of others. For example, Abraham's intercession for Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 18. Moshe himself frequently interceded on behalf of the Israelites when God was wrath with them. However, there is no narrative in the Torah where the Israelites intercede with God on Moshe's behalf. How sad is that? Perhaps this could be a moment for the Israelites to step up and demonstrate their growth, maturity, and gratitude toward Moshe. But they didn't do it. And it adds another layer of complexity and perhaps even tragedy to the story. It's a part of what makes the story so rich and thought-provoking and capable of speaking to us in profound ways, even thousands of years after they were written. So the question that arises for me from this story is, how can we stand up for others? How can we show our appreciation for their sacrifice? Do we treat our leaders as human beings who need not only our compassion and help, but also our prayers to God on their behalf? And I do not speak about myself right now, because that would kind of negate all of the meaning of this speech. I'm thinking about the leaders of our community, the clergy, and people who work in the office, and our board members, and volunteers who sit in different committees. How often do we say thank you to them or pray on their behalf? How often do we intercede with God on their behalf, acknowledging their irreplaceable impact on the well-being of our community? I want us to remember that everyone is human and everyone is trying their best to sustain this wonderful community that we are blessed with. And the behavior of Moshe in this situation is truly noble. Despite his personal heartbreak, he continues to lead and guide the Israelites. The people, for the most part, seem to take his leadership for granted and do not intercede on his behalf when he is barred from entering the promised land. Yet he doesn't abandon them. He guides Yehoshua on how to continue this journey and be a good leader, and he accepts his destiny with humility and dignity. But he reminds us, on your behalf, God denied me entry to the land. It's a powerful message in my eyes. We often forget that leaders are human too, with their own struggles and disappointments, and the notion of standing up for them, showing empathy, and not just passively expecting them to solve every problem, I think is a potent reminder of our responsibility as members of this community, any community, in society in general. If we support our leaders while also holding them accountable, that's important, and it can lead to more robust, more empathetic communities and societies. So my wish coming from this chapter, may we learn from Moshe's resilience and from Israelites' silence. May we strive to be active participants in our communities, showing empathy, gratitude, and support to our leaders. And may we find the journey of our ancestors to be an inspiration to forge a path of courage, kindness, and shared responsibility. Shabbat Shalom.